Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, the Democratic Alliance is accusing the ANC Youth League of breaking international law. The Youth League members are acting as observers in Russian referendums in occupied Ukrainian territories. The Kremlin is polling Ukrainians to find out if they want to join Russia. The DA says the Youth League, through their actions, are legitimizing the polls. It also wants to know who is funding the exercise. Let's speak now to DA's Darren Bergmann, who joins us via Zoom. Mr. Bergmann, good morning and thank you very much for your time. Now, you're seeking answers around who could have funded what you say is a serious breach of international law by the Youth League. But before we get into that and their presence in the Ukraine, can you just share your views on the referendum itself?
Yes, so, I mean, we think this is a shame. Of course, like most of the rest of the world, to hold a referendum at this point in time, there should be no credibility to such a referendum. And I think that any country or any party that is going to observe such a referendum is wasting their time and wasting their money. It must be a gimmick.
And then to their presence, the Youth League, what are your concerns exactly about their presence as observers in these territories that were taken over by the Russian military?
Well, the concerns are twofold. Look, I must just say that I think our government is playing Russian roulette with South African taxpayers' pockets, well, the citizens' pockets. I think everyone pays tax in terms of the food, our food prices that are going up and up and up, not just because of load shedding, but actually because of the war in Ukraine. Every time that we antagonize what's taking place in Ukraine by doing silly things that we do, the food price, the effects of what's actually taking place is affecting the pockets of every South African. And as I say, this is really playing Russian roulette at this stage. So now we have the ANC Youth League going to Russia. So someone must have paid for this trip. I cannot believe that it's the own ANC Youth League funding. Each member that has gone is funding it from their own pockets. So was it Russia that funded this? And if so, then, we've accepted money from Russia to do so. And again, this in itself, to go to give credence to something where you're saying a normal sovereign state can just walk into another sovereign state and decide on annexing areas of that sovereign state, that is against international law in itself. So, what's stopping South Africa or Zimbabwe from walking into South Africa and saying in South Africa, well, we decide that we want Limpopo, and then holding a referendum that, to state that they want Limpopo, and then the ZANU-PF Youth League coming to hold a referendum in Limpopo.
But is this, apologies for interjecting, but is this not a conflation of party and state here? Because do we not need to distinguish between the two and say that the ANC Youth League has went in its capacity as a political party, because you say government is playing Russian roulette with our taxpayer money. But in this instance, I think your concern is around who could have funded it, and you're alluding to a possibility of this having been funded, this trip having been funded by Russia itself. But what if it was privately funded by somebody perhaps in the country,
Sure.
a business abroad? Would that still be a concern?
Yes, well, so I started with that. I started with the law. If it goes down to the ANC, I've got a problem because, of course, I'm empathetic to the staff members of the ANC that have not been paid their salaries yet. So if the ANC is now funding trips down to Russia, but not paying their staff their salaries, I have a fundamental problem with that in terms of our social living at this point in time.
And priorities, I take it, and where our priorities should lie. But then some could easily now be saying, but hang on, your leader, John Steenhuisen, went on a fact-finding mission to Poland, Warsaw, which allowed him to be closer to the situation, and perhaps this was legitimately to form an informed opinion on the issue. I know that even the funders then went on to state that this was an opportunity to educate the public on international issues. Wouldn't you say that in this instance, the Youth League themselves want to be closer to the situation, and then if they express a view as a youth wing of a political party, they say, we know what has been happening. People have said it's a sham. Maybe it is a legitimate process. They can only form a view if they're physically there. What would you say to those that hold that view?
This is a lovely one, because this is an interesting tale of two trips. You know, you've got one where the leader goes to see in two sides what's happening and has not expressed an opinion at that stage, is seen from the ground. And the benefit of that trip is to understand the effects on the pockets of all the South Africans, and his interest is on, first of all, human rights, and second, on the pockets of the South Africans. Contrast that to what's happening with the ANC Youth League, who's going to lend legitimacy to a referendum and keeping it local within Russia and Ukraine. It's a tale of two different trips, but I must then throw it back to the media, is that when the leader of the DA goes, the media makes a whole harp about it on all the front pages of all the media houses. But when the ANC Youth League go, you got to almost look for it on page 8, 9, or 10 to find out about their trip. What if the ANC funded this, or what if the taxpayer funded the ANC Youth League trip? Then we've got a fundamental problem with that, because I'm sure the taxpayer, if you held a referendum in South Africa, I'm sure you'll find that the average taxpayer would not have wanted to fund such a trip. So, you know, your question is actually very valid.
Because honestly speaking, right now, many would go to, even when it was time to disclose who the funders were, you'd remember that your leader, John Steenhuisen, was a bit reluctant. Yes, he attributed this to safety, that, you know, it was a very difficult time. You didn't want to reveal Brent Hurst Foundation as the funders, etc. But nevertheless, when some assumed that you had taken a position to be empathetic to one side, even though he left, once he clarified that this was a fact-finding mission, we want to express a view based on the facts, some people did accept that. So it still remains, for some, it would be difficult to say, why can't we accept that the Youth League has gone there on a similar fact-finding mission to establish the facts for themselves?
I must say, John was never reluctant to reveal who the donors were. He was reluctant on the trip to reveal who the donors were, but he always said that he'd reveal when he got back who the donors were. He could never reveal while he was on the trip who the donors were, as you say, for the safety reasons. But you must also know that from 2016, the DA have been calling on the government to use their proximity to President Putin, not to take a side. At that stage, the DA have always said, just use your proximity to de-escalate. At that stage, it was the encroachment on the Crimean Peninsula. In 2018, it was the building of the forces on the occupied territories. We never said take a side. At all stages, we just said use your proximity to Putin to de-escalate what was happening between the West and Russia. We saw South Africa playing a nice mediation role, and the DA has always been vocal on that. And it was only in 2021, 2022, when it was obvious that Russia was then invading Ukraine. That was the only time that the DA took a side. At no stage had the DA even taken a side. The DA had always just said, use your proximity to President Putin. We had a beautiful opportunity in BRICS to actually be able to probably play a world role that no one else had the advantage to do. We weren't entirely we weren't entirely in agreement with NATO and what they were doing. So what we were saying was, please use your proximity to do what you can do in terms of mediation, just to de-escalate. But once it became an incursion, then we said, and that was only for the protection of the pockets of people in South Africa, for the food prices, the petrol prices. And another interesting thing that you must note, that in BRICS, Brazil, India, China, they all get benefits from Russia at this stage. They're getting discounts in fertilizer, they're getting discounts in gas and oil. by belonging to BRICS now during this war, South Africa is not getting any benefit. So what the ANC Youth League could be channeling their friendship with Russia in a bit more beneficial way is to rather try and get better benefit for South Africa in discounts, whether it came to the fuel price or whether it came to food prices, for the pockets of the South Africans. And before anyone says, you see, it's only the taxpayer that we're worried about, every single person in South Africa is a taxpayer. From the person that has to buy a sanitary pad, to the person that has to buy a Coke, to the person that has to buy bread, rice. You know, as you know, the DA is trying to get more products zero rated in VAT, but everyone has to buy products in South Africa. So we are trying to fight for the average man's tax pocket to lower the tax in the pocket.
Mr. Bergmann, I can assure you we will now be trying to establish who in fact funded the ANC Youth League's trip there, and also just to get the rationale behind the trip itself, why they've gone there. What would it benefit them as a youth wing of the African National Congress, and perhaps those that support the political party, who must certainly be getting all the answers. But thank you very much for joining us this morning. That's Darren Bergmann from the Democratic Alliance. Now it's